away. Chapter 20, Forest of Thorns. Woof, woof! Samson burst from the woods and charged between her and the bewitched pigs. He was bigger than them, and he wasn't afraid. Samson! Dawn yelled in gratitude. The huge dog stared the feral pigs down, then chased them into the woods. Once the creatures were gone, he returned to her side. His pink tongue lolled out of his mouth as he licked her hands, but then he whined. Dawn knew the reason. He misses Philippa. Hey, boy, thanks for saving me, Dawn said, petting his head. It's so dark, she said. Can you lead me back to my bike? Samson barked happily and led her through the woods. The moon had risen, granting them some light, and his coat was bright white, making it easy to follow him through the trees. A few minutes later, they arrived at her bike, still propped up and not too far from the road, but hidden inside the edge of the forest. Fortunately, the spinning wheel and her stuff remained untouched. She breathed a sigh of relief, running her hand over the antique wheel. Thanks, boy, Dawn said, giving Samson another head scratch. You're a prince. You saved me. He whined again and buried his head into her side. I know you miss her. I do too. Dawn felt sadness growing inside her like a deep pool of water, drowning her heart in its dark, murky depths. It's all my fault too, she said to Samson. Please forgive me. She felt tears falling, probably sourced from what internal well of sadness. He looked at her face, and in some unspoken way, she knew that he forgave her. But then Samson backed up and barked. I know, Dawn started, but then he barked more insistently. He gently grabbed her sleeve, trying to pull her deeper into the forest. Hey, boy, the woods are dangerous, Dawn said. The dark fairy might find us, or those pigs might come back. But Samson barked and tugged harder, trying to get her to follow him. Dawn remembered the rose garden maze and how he had saved them. Wait, boy, what is it? Dawn said. Do you know where to find Philippa? He barked excitedly at the mention of her name, then started sniffing the ground. He turned back for Dawn. Woof, woof! Dawn hesitated. She'd only ever been on the outskirts of the forest, and even that was creepy enough. Samson barked impatiently. You're right, boy, Dawn said, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. Her heart hammered anyway. We don't have much time. We have to save her. She grabbed her bike, then followed Samson as he cut a path through the forest. He led her in the opposite direction of where the killer pigs had chased her. It made sense in a way. If they were bewitched by the dark fairy, then they wouldn't want her to find her friend. Lead me to Philippa, Dawn called. He woofed and took off at a faster clip now. It was darker the deeper they went into the thick trees of the foreboding forest. This was pitch black, the kind that felt thick and impenetrable. Suddenly, lightning lit up the forest, then thunder crackled. The wind almost picked up, shrieking through the trees, making their branches rattle around. Hurry, boy, Dawn called. Samson barked and increased his speed. Dawn pedaled harder. They needed to outpace the unnatural storm brewing around them. Branches smacked her face and sliced her cheeks, but she ignored them. The path Samson was tracking was pounded down dirt, and in the quick flashes of lightning, Dawn saw fresh footprints marring the earth. Then, right when Dawn feared that they were horribly lost, or worse, about to become a snack for some hideous creature lurking in the woods, she saw the glow of artificial light ahead. Look, boy, she called to Samson. They pushed in that direction. Dawn pedaled faster, and they emerged on the outskirts of town. She slipped on her sunglasses, which made it hard to see in the dim light. Even though it was night, the lights were still on in all the shops, and the signs were flipped to open. Yet it was quiet. Too quiet. Dawn followed Samson, biking through the center of town. A pickup truck appeared to have crashed into a metal dumpster. The truck's radiator was smoking, with steam hissing out from under the hood. A green station wagon idled beside the town's one-stop sign. It sat in a pool of light cast by the street lamps lining the block. Dawn biked over and peered through the window, then stared back in shock. The driver was asleep at the wheel. He was a middle-aged man, and strapped into the passenger seat next to him was Fred, her classmate. He was also fast asleep. He'd been playing a video game on his phone. The beeping of his phone and the soft hum of the car's engine made it even more terrifying. Now that Dawn was closer, she could see pedestrians frozen on the streets, mid-conversation but now snoring away on their feet. Even though she wore her sunglasses, it didn't matter. She slipped them off. The curse had grown stronger. Now the whole town was affected. Woof! Samson barked, then whined, sensing that something was terribly wrong. He trotted over and licked the face of a little boy who was fast asleep holding his mother's hand. He couldn't have been much older than 2. He held a lollipop and was in the middle of eating it. But even Samson's magic couldn't wake the child from his slumber. Dawn's stomach churned with a potent mixture of fear and dread, a nauseating combination. The people on the sidewalks didn't wake up, not even when she shook them. They were dead asleep. And it seemed like this time, nothing could wake them up. Maleficent had cursed all of Castletown with the sleeping sickness. That was why the lights were on. That was why the shops weren't closed. Everyone had fallen asleep where they were standing, even if it was in the middle of driving or walking somewhere. Dawn leaned her bike against the rack. It still had the spinning wheel and sword strapped to it. Maybe she could find someone who wasn't cursed, or who she could wake up. She approached the drugstore she and Philippa had visited 2 days earlier and peered through the front door. Dawn pushed it open and entered the store. Shoppers stood in the aisles, clutching baskets filled with items, yet asleep in the middle of shopping. They looked so peaceful like that, but they were all cursed. Dawn found the shopkeeper halfway through checking out a customer, an elderly woman with dyed red hair, clutching an oversized handbag stuffed to the brim. She held a credit card in her hand. They were both snoring loudly. Dawn nudged Mr. Crowley, but he didn't wake up. He continued snoring. He didn't even stir. Come on, Mr. Crowley. But he remained dead asleep. Dawn swallowed hard and backed away. Suddenly, the shopkeeper's head snapped around, and he lurched at her. His eyes were shut, but his lips curled back in rage. Poor, simple fool, he hissed in the dark fairy's voice. Dawn ducked down, and he barely missed tackling her. She bolted through the front door and slammed it shut, making the bell jangle gleefully. The shopkeeper fumbled at the doorknob, but couldn't operate it with his shaky hands. He was stuck inside. Dawn felt relieved and backed away slowly. Suddenly, though, he broke through the glass door on the door. It shattered into pieces, cutting her face and spilling onto the sidewalk like tiny diamonds. Blood trickled down her cheeks. She scrambled away but tripped and fell back. He stumbled toward Dawn with his arms outstretched. His eyes were shut, but his lips moved. Give it back, the man hissed, or all the powers of hell shall be unleashed upon you.